This is only the second time that we've gone this route before, where it sends it to other pages live. So we'll see what it does.
All good.
And then, oh, where's my chat? Oh, that's not my chat.
Oh, hey, there it is. Look at it go.
Is there a link for the current live stream?
I am setting that up right now. So if folks want to share it, that's the YouTube live. There. And I think for Facebook people, I think it does it automatically. It says like Geek in the City Radio is streaming live. Sorry, Mimi, it's a little hectic for this is our second time pulling this thing off.
Oh no, you're fine. You're the all pros.
Oh no. Woo. Oh, good. I'm glad it always screen caps me with just a perfect visual. Okay, I think we're ready to go officially. So I'll do a little intro and hello, everyone. Welcome to issue 552 of Geek in the City Radio. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Duran.
I'm one of your other hosts, Bean Rita.
And I'm your other host, Cable Hashtani.
And joining us this week is our special guest all the way over in Florida, Mimi Chan.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Mimi.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Right off the bat, should we officially call you Sifu Mimi Chan or just Mimi, or what do you? Because I'm looking at your name down there. I'm like, oh, I got to use your title. Awesome.
Oh no. Just Mimi's fine for this realm. The podcast realm, I'm just Mimi. But yes, Sifu Mimi is my official title.
But if any of your students log in, they better not just call you Mimi.
Right? No, that would not be okay. They know better though.
Right. So I think I initially reached out to you mainly because I kept seeing your Instagram page hanging out with Greg. And I was like,
we were instantly jealous of.
And we're like, wait a minute, how can she have him on the show more than us already? No.
Yeah, it has been kind of surreal, really, because I actually only met him last year at San Diego Comic-Con because I had a panel there, and my podcast realm is my very, very, very part-time passion project. I'm not, like I said earlier, I'm not professional like you guys, and I haven't been doing this that long. I just really enjoy it, and actually, no coincidence, started it in 2016, and so wanted to have some voices out there. So I met Greg last year, and then it was just super crazy at San Diego, and he was like, "Why don't you come out to Portland, to Rose City, and I'll invite you to my house, and we can have a 2-hour interview then." And I was like, okay. And at the time, I didn't really think I was going to go because, I live in Florida, but I also have a Kung Fu affiliation out there. So I do have a small school that I have a student that teaches. And I was like, well, I could probably make this work. And so he was so gracious. And just since then, we really kind of had this nice bond. And since COVID started, he offered, and if you've ever met me, you don't actually offer me anything because I will take you up on it. He said, well, I'll just chat with you weekly during this quarantine if you want. And I said, okay. And so now we have a weekly podcast.
No, that's awesome. That's really great. I'm trying to think. Oh, my dice are going everywhere because I'm fidgeting. I'm trying to remember Denise or Cable. Do you guys remember how we first had Greg on?
Very first?
Was it during?
Don't.
Was it leading up to Wonder Woman Rebirth?
That feels right. Because that would have been, well, the movie was 2017, right? Or was it 2018?
17.
I feel 17, but
But
dates are irrelevant right now.
Time doesn't.
Time, yeah.
2017. So it would have been a goodly while before that for the book, his run on the book. So let's say 2016.
Yeah, something maybe. Yeah, but yeah,
that would have been the reason most likely.
Right. Yeah. And then that whole joke about time made me realize that of the many things that Douglas Adams got correct, it was that time is meaningless.
Yes.
But none of it none of it really matters.
So true. So true. But it has been a really jarring time, I think, for everybody. And it has been really, honestly, I think Greg and I just admitted, I think last week on air, it's pretty much our therapy. Like every week we just sit there and talk, and it's been really helpful, honestly, through the process. And I think it's great that you guys have a weekly show as well, because it really just offers kind of an outlet, I think, as personally as the host. I don't know for you guys, because you host a very similar style show where it's very conversational. And while you probably have a lot of things to talk about, obviously what's happening in the world becomes current. I know I heard last week's podcast, and I thought that was great. And so, it's just one of those things that I'm actually really glad I have this passion project, because it's been really helpful for me.
I think that is a commonality that all podcasters share, is within a certain time frame they figure out, oh, this is my therapy. This is exactly what that is.
It definitely feels that way for me, like without question. For as like stressful as it can be sometimes to organize the show and everything. And I realize that seems like such a first world problem. Like, oh, I get so stressed out trying to set up my podcast from home. But I also think, at least for me personally, I put way too much weight on every little thing that I do. So if the podcast doesn't sound perfect, then it will sit on me. I will actually begin to apologize to people like, oh, don't listen to this week. Like there was a cracking in my mic. Oh, don't, it's awful. Stop. But then, yeah, definitely being on is a form of therapy for sure.
I know that I have a tendency to try to treat it like a job sometimes, where I get a little bit I get a little bit too me, and I'm like, oh, I should be organizing this and scheduling that and planning this and that and the other. But the actual core of podcasting, which is, the three of us and occasionally a guest sitting in front of mics together and just having a conversation is very therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we can't do it in the same room these days, it's still getting together with friends and just having a nice conversation, which you can never have enough of.
So true.
Sure.
And I think even more so now, especially with quarantine, right? Like you guys have your weekly party in a sense, right? And or therapy session, or however you want to put it. I think even more so that we're all restricted, and it's been just this really crazy time. Even more so, having that human connection is important, and so that's why it's been great. And I'm so grateful to Greg. I mean, I love having him on the show. I'm always learning, so it's really, I feel like it's a one-way advantage relationship, because I'm very novice in the world of comics and whatnot. Like I enjoy it, and it's ironic because I do have a lot of comic creators on my show, but I am very much a novice in that area.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I taught Greg something the very first time he was a guest on our show.
Oh my
so
God,
never
really?
feel like you can't contribute in the other direction.
You give me grief for bringing this up, but you deep down are so proud of it.
No, well, I think it's funny. It's a funny anecdote.
When you called it the lariat instead of the lasso?
No, other way around. See, now for something I'll never forget. Now I'm forgetting.
I referred to it as a lariat. He corrected me. You corrected him. And
okay.
You were correct.
Okay.
And then he looked at me and looked at you and went, damn it. Yeah.
But all this to say, don't feel like time with Greg is only like to your benefit. He can get something out of it too.
No, and he
expresses
that. He does express that. But I'm always, I'm like, oh, tell me more about writing. And I'm not a writer, but but it does definitely go back and forth. Because of course, as a martial artist, that's so ingrained in me though, to constantly be, humble and learning and whatnot. But yeah, I'm sure that if he felt exhausted through the conversations, we wouldn't be heading into week 9 or 10 or whatever we are.
Right. Well, speaking of your martial arts and your training, your background, kind of being that this is like a pop culture show, can you kind of give us the secret origin of Mimi Chan? The classic kind of who's who?
Yes, well, for the pop culture fans, and the reason I actually started to get into cons and things like that was my first con that I went to, convention, was MomoCon in Atlanta. And I was just invited as a guest because, of course, I was the model for Mulan and Disney's animated feature. And that's kind of a big deal for the Disney fans. And it was a really big deal at the time. It feels like a million years ago now. But I've pretty much been doing Kung Fu since I was 3. So that's my real quote unquote day job, day job by, Kung Fu teacher and then podcaster part-time. But yeah,
So
It
that's
almost
what
sounds like it should be the other way around.
I know. I know, because it's so mythical, Kung Fu teacher.
It's borderline superhero work.
right. Yeah. I actually had to promise my co-host that I would not nerd out over Mulan stuff because I'm probably the resident Disney fanatic in the chat.
It's okay.
In the room right now.
I didn't know that
actually
about
love
you,
that.
Aaron.
It's in my top 5 Disney films. So
I love that. And actually, I just had today's release on my show is Gail Simone, and she's a huge Mulan fan. And we had this like total like fangirl moment where she's fangirling over Mulan and I'm fangirling over her stuff. And so it was really a lot of fun. but it's really amazing to me because I feel like it was so long ago, yet it's so important to so many different people of different ages. And I always think the young kids don't watch anything if it's not CG. So I assume, no one's watched it, but then I've been really fortunate to be able to kind of have that outreach and see a lot of fans that enjoy it and my small part in it and everything. And occasionally Ming Na comes to Florida for the candlelight at Epcot. And so a couple times we've had the Mulan reunion and we always catch up there. I mean, I didn't meet her while we were working on it, but over the years we've been able to connect. So that's always fun.
Nice.
that's really cool. So what, I think one of the things we also want to like talk about is having to do with like the various casting or the work that happens in pop culture, behind the scenes. And not to like take an immediate spin into more kind of serious topics or what have you, but I feel like there were some real headroads that were being made even within the last year with more, diverse voices within comics and television and film. And now my general impression is a lot of that has just been shut down. As like, film production has come to a halt, same with television, and publishing has slowed way down. And now as it starts to ramp back up, my big concern is that these companies are, and I can't totally fault them for this, they're going to fall back on what has already made them their billions of dollars instead of taking chances again, instead of taking the risk that they were kind of willing to take the hit on, because now they've been doing nothing but taking a hit. So, what's everyone's kind of thoughts on like how we can move forward and make sure that the few strides that were made aren't thrown aside almost immediately?
I think that one of the key things is something that has started making the rounds these days on social media is, hey, remember that like just because equality tweets and TikToks are what's on your timelines right now, doesn't mean that's what it's going to be next week. Don't let that mean it's not like, don't make that let you believe that it's not an issue anymore. You have to do the individual work of remembering that this is an ongoing issue. And I think that applies to all industries in saying like, okay, well, we did our token work last month of being more inclusive. And now we can just go back to creating whatever with whatever fallback, core demographics we're used to. As consumers, we have to keep pushing for and supporting the content that is more inclusive.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially what you just said about the consumer side, because ultimately, studios and everything, they're they're driven by the dollar sign, right? So if the consumers support the work, then hopefully that will show. I mean, and I know that we're probably talking about the strides with, Black Panther, Crazy Rich Asians. And I mean, those were like, oh my gosh, something happened for different, minorities, people of color. And while those strides were really great, it's interesting because there are still like really tiny steps, kind of what we're dealing with now with Black Lives Matter, right? Like, oh wow, you know, there's little strides in some of the changes in the police department and whatnot, but there's still just really tiny steps. And back into the film side of things, it's I think also I want to laud people like Mindy Kaling, who's really doing fantastic work, who's always trying to make sure that people of color are being represented on screen. And I've been, you know, now that we have a little more time at home, I've seen some of these Netflix shows and Hulu shows she's doing. And so I think on the creator side, to constantly have those voices out there is really important. And the fact that those shows are doing well. So like you said, the consumer side, if I don't know how it works, do you guys know, like, Netflix statistics, like, oh, so many people watched this program and therefore, like, you know, you get that top 10 and I'm always like, I think they're lying. I don't really believe this is a top 10 of this week or whatever, but I feel like on the consumer side, definitely, you know, constantly showing support for those type of programming is important.
I think the Netflix thing is tricky because, as we know, different programs will be recommended to different groups. What was that that animated shorts series where the episodes were in different orders for different
Love, Death, Robots.
Oh,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah. And when I saw those tweets about how The Help was #1 in America on Netflix, I went to Netflix and I looked at the top 10 list. It was not. It was like #7. So I don't know how accurate that is versus how quickly they change it versus how much are they catering that that billboard listing essentially to different audiences. So I mean, if I watch almost exclusively diverse shows, are they more likely to show me a ratings listing that is more in tune with what I would expect or what I would like to see? So that one I'm a little bit suspicious of. I think to me, it's just a matter of like, just choosing for yourself.
Yeah, I was always curious about that. I thought maybe you guys would have an idea.
Yeah, I wish I had some kind of insight onto how that algorithm works. Is like Denise had mentioned, that Birth, Death, Robots thing was really weird in that people got a different order of those shorts depending on who they were.
Really? Okay. I didn't realize that.
And even Netflix finally admitted that they were tailoring the way the shorts were laid out by the viewing pattern of that account.
Which in essence almost feels like they were, I don't mean this in like a nefarious way, but it feels like they were trying to do a bait and switch. Let me serve you this thing that we know you'll like, and then a little bit down the road, I'm going to turn it around and give you something that you might not have tried otherwise.
I know that when I watched it, it started with Sunny's Edge, which was the pit fighting episode.
That's the one that it started with me too.
And then eventually started getting into the more cutesy episodes, which makes total sense to me.
Right. And mine started with with basically the sentient, like, robots. Like, there was no life left on Earth, but the robots were now like they were now being
with
tourists.
The cats?
With the cat. That's that's the one mine started with.
Yeah, that was like my 4th episode.
Yeah, it was
Mine started with the revengey stuff.
That tracks.
See, just in this, I've learned a lot about you three. Thank you, Netflix. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I'm the only one in this group that doesn't own a cat.
I don't own a cat.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant yeah.
I know. I was kidding.
But the other reason why I was I started to cry foul on the Netflix stuff, at least how they would kind of decide what was going to be their biggest hits, is that the one I keep going back to was when they were basically about to not renew the One Day at a Time show that they had, which was like trending 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. It had won an Emmy. It was like winning all these awards, and they kept bragging about how great the show was and how happy they were to have it. But if you went into Netflix and you click on the one page, it's like all of the original content, it wouldn't show up. Like, you'd have to actually type in the title of the show to get it to show up. Because then their follow-up reason for canceling was like, well, it didn't have the viewers. Which didn't ring true if it was, winning awards, highest rated, getting all these articles written about it. And when you would go on to Netflix to look for it, you figure if you have a show that's winning those awards, whether you personally like it or not, Like you put it on
They'd be pushing it.
you push it, basically you do the above the fold with it, and they just weren't.
Yeah. But don't you notice that all this Netflix, Hulu, all of them, Prime, even like it's their stuff first, right? So it's like
Sure.
you scroll across and it's just like Netflix. And even in Hulu, you have to kind of you have to search stuff now versus because that's what they're pushing first. And so
Right.
I only have like a very small window because I used to have a film on Hulu and it was through an indie distributor. And then, you wonder how these get picked. And of course, Netflix didn't pick us up. And that was right around the time where they were doing their own stuff. They were really only promoting their own things. And so it was a really interesting time as an indie filmmaker. But for sure, I don't even know. And I had films on these different platforms and I don't even know how it works, how they, decide, right? It's kind of like YouTube. I know that we've had more views than this.
Right. Well, it seems like YouTube changes their algorithms every time people begin to figure out how to monetize it properly. They're like, oh no, we've had to change the rules now to make it better for you. It's never better for us. Never, ever, ever. I don't mean to get all like negative, but it's like no change a company makes, I think, is ever better for their consumer or their clients.
No, it's always about whatever makes them the most money.
Right. But a lot of these companies are real tight on their numbers. Like I don't know anyone in comics that actually knows their digital numbers at all. They know their sales numbers from, book orders, but every publisher out there is super tight-lipped on what their digital numbers are like. And, the pseudo conspiracy person in me wonders, like, are they hiding those numbers because that means they'd have to share that money?
Probably.
Yeah. So I had a question and kind of relating to what you were talking about in film and how that diversity can say, because you notice also like every third film out there is from comics, right? There's like a comic theme. So is it also now on that IP, those creators, to make sure there's diversity? And I know there are a lot of creators that are really big on that. And you guys probably know a lot more about comics than I do. So I was curious as to what you've seen in the trends over the last few years in terms of that. And because it does influence the film industry, since, they're not coming up with their own ideas. They're like, let's just take another Spider-Man or whatever. They're basically, they'd rather have that content.
Right. I think as a rule, I think creators are really pushing for more diverse voices. That might be the kind of the circle and the bubble that I run in also, in that I tend to only read creators that try to create a more diverse voices to begin with. So my own views could be very biased on what is actually happening out there. But I do think, comics as a rule, at least on the creator side, does and wants to. But it's then convincing a publisher to take that title. And then they take it. Then it's convincing a store, which is already kind of having a rough time right now, to take a chance on the title. And again, like I personally get it. If you run a comic book shop, you have to, first off, you have to pay 90 days in advance for a title, which is just ludicrous that's how the market works. And I get it. If you run a comic book shop, you have limited shelf space. So are you going to devote shelf space to this title that has a Black woman as the main character, and someone maybe knows the creator, but they don't know this character, they don't know the story? Or are you going to take yet another version of the X-Men that you may not really like the creators, but they put Wolverine on the cover and people buy Wolverine. So I think in theory it's there, but I don't know if it's happening in practice, if that makes sense.
They still have the same quote unquote big studio problem, the whole big publisher problem.
Go ahead.
I think so. This is a weird simile to establish, but do you remember that episode of The Simpsons where Marge finds a Chanel 2-piece suit on a clearance rack, and all of a sudden she gets in with these like society ladies and is having, she becomes a lady who lunches. But But after a short period of time, they're like, man, you keep wearing that same outfit. And now she's getting like class shamed again. And so she keeps redesigning the same materials from the same dress over and over so that she can bring variety to her wardrobe, so she can continue to fit in, so she can be what she thinks people want. And then eventually it just like turns to dust in her hands because she bled it dry. And I think I want to believe that that's what will happen at some point, is like you can only reboot the X-Men franchise so many times and like disappoint, honestly, because it just keeps getting watered down by taking the same thing but trying to make it new and fresh. At some point they just have to run out, right? It has to just flop. And they have to finally. You would think, right? I would like to think that one day enough people are going to be like, I'm sick of you just trying to recycle this same shit. It's never been as good as it was in the beginning. So just stop it.
I mean, you'd think so, but I don't think that's happening.
No, it's not. And I think that's this gets back. Sorry, I had this as an earlier answer, but this gets back into the phrase that I keep hearing from everybody right now is like, well, when we go back to normal, or when we can get things back to normal. I don't want normal again. I don't want normal ever again, because normal sucked.
Create a new normal, I guess.
Yes. I want something. I do want new. I don't necessarily need it to be normal.
Yeah.
But I want new. And
yeah, like Mimi said, you want better. I mean, because trust me, new could be an extra big shit show.
Yes, this is true. I do want better. That's
right.
Yeah. New can be very scary. But better for sure.
Yeah, new could be here come the alien jellyfish to ruin everything. Like, there's new for you, Cable.
Oh, that's actually might be an improvement though.
You know what? It worked for Ozymandias for 40 years. Why don't we give it a shot for a little bit? Sorry, little Watchmen humor.
I mean, speaking of bringing back a franchise, that's one that in my opinion, actually really knocked it out of the park.
Agreed.
I mean, I know it took me like 6 months to get on that wagon, but I think that having watched it like literally like in the past month was actually added value to the gravity of what they were trying to address.
Yes.
And
very
also, I haven't read the comic, although it is on my short list now, because it turns out it's been on my shelf. But I've seen the movie a handful of times, and safe to say there's some definitely problematic characters in that series.
Yes.
And it's nice to not only bring diversity into the franchise, but also make those diverse characters and their struggles really be the thing that makes the story. And I thought that to me was an excellent way to recreate and add value to an existing franchise.
Yeah, it was refreshing for sure. But I feel like HBO kind of pushes the envelope on that a little bit more than they're less safe, right? So I feel like that was the platform for it. And I think escaping me now, but of course the creator is like, I'm only going to do more if I feel like it's going to be right. And if it's going to be at that level. And then he's just like, nope, not going to do it. I'm like, oh, but yeah, it was really refreshing. And I did read it. It's been a long time. And my comic book friend showed me that amazing thing where I guess like if you turn the pages, like in the middle, it's like all symmetrical or something. And so it's like so brilliant, but it was interesting because it has nothing really to do with the comic. It's just the pieces of it. And I had to admittedly YouTube and go, okay, what the heck happened in the first episode?
Right.
And my friend was like, just wait till the end. It'll all make sense. I was like, you want me to watch a whole, and then of course it does, but yeah, it's layered. It's very intense. Yeah.
And I think something I appreciated about it is that he had as another podcast I listen to has one of the co-hosts is this writer named Mark Bernardin, and he's in fact, you should try to get him on your show if you can. We keep trying to get him too. He's friends with Lyndon. How do you say his name? Lindelof.
Lindelof. Yep.
And they apparently spoke to each other, and Lindelof said like HBO offered me. He loves Watchmen. He's like, HBO offered me to do this Watchmen series. I don't think I want to do it because who can do justice to it? I don't want to turn into it another, like, I don't want it to be like a 10-hour version of a Zack Snyder movie. I just don't want it to happen. And Mark Bernardin's answer was, look, if you don't do it, they're going to find somebody to do it. Like HBO is going to find someone to make this happen. So if they're offering it to you, you might as well try and find where you can unpack it and make it yours, because they're going to do it. And apparently it's when he learned about the actual Tulsa massacre where that was his springboard. And then he also realized, oh, it can't be a white guy who tells this story.
Right.
Which it's kind of interesting when you see the credits. He's always on the story credit, but there's always another name. He's basically just there so that HBO leaves them alone and lets them tell their story, which I thought is really interesting. And I think is a way that white people in position of authority and power can really help out of saying like, I've got this idea, and the publisher or the film company says, great, you're hired. And they say, okay. And then they step back and say, here's the writer's room.
Yeah.
Tricked you,
That's a really good method. That is one way of, rather than being like a quote unquote white savior, is to actually be an ally. It's like, okay, well, this is what my privilege has, or hard work, or both, has earned me, is, a seat at this table. Let me then take that opportunity and trickle it down, for lack of a better way of putting it, to more diverse voices. Like I've got the clout, but I'm going to use it to elevate people who do not, but should.
It's the ultimate turning over your platform.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's actually something that a lot of really good creators, I would think, do, or at least feel responsibility for. Whether you're creating original content or you're working with somebody else's IP. I mean, yeah, you're there to entertain and inform and give people another way to look at life through art. But I also think eventually you have a responsibility to then help foster who's going to come after you, because your desire to tell stories, I personally, this is for me, didn't just come out of nowhere. Like I didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a writer. Like it was an evolution. And there were definitely key moments in my past that put little pieces in that eventually built a story that was Aaron, who would become a writer one day. And it is, I feel, my responsibility to one day offer that back. Otherwise, otherwise I'm just taking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, Cable.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that back to what Denise was saying, though, was basically some people do have the clout, right? And so there are all these stories, and you can see the successes when they bring staff or crew or whatever on to offer authenticity, especially when it's cultural, right? Because how many movies have been quote unquote, like you use whitewash, whatever, how many have just not gone the way of authenticity in fear of having a person of color lead, or in fear of having too much of one ethnicity when it's actually about that culture or something. So I think that's been a bit of a shift, because the community has taken to the boards. They put petitions out. They're actually rising up and using their voices. So I think all of that's very important in terms of diversity and being protective over that culture, but sharing it, right? So there's like that. I've had a lot of cultural appropriation discussions on my podcast in the past, because my show's called Culture Chat. And so, yeah, I have a lot of that, especially with Asian culture and Black culture. Like there's like a lot of borrowing back and forth, but I think there's a difference between taking and then also honoring something, right? So I feel like it's okay if someone wants to use kung fu in something, as long as they're, a little bit appropriate, but also honoring it. Like there's this fine line, and people get kind of funny about it. But I think in creation and film and writing and all of that, if you have like a source that's authentic, that's very key. And you see a lot of the successful, filmmakers and whatnot using that. Like you said, Denise, like not everybody has that. Oh, I have this great film, but if you're a nobody, you're not going to get into the HBO or whatnot.
Right.
Hmm.
And I think the audiences are also beginning to tell the difference between something that is appropriation and appreciation. And it's a
Exactly.
pretty fine line. And I don't mean they see the difference in terms of like, I think when they notice it is that I think the story just feels more authentic because you can tell when it's coming from an honest voice. Whether it's someone who did just a ton of research and got all the right experts, got all the right voices to make sure they were telling the correct story, or if it's someone who's just telling their authentic understanding of their culture or their background, the story just comes out better. I think there's even little subtle things that you don't even realize it until you think about it afterwards. I keep, it's a weird divergence. A few nights ago, because I just decided to do it, I rewatched Suicide Squad, which is still not a very good movie. Apart from
I'll just take your word for it.
Apart from Margot Robbie and Will Smith, I actually think Will Smith was pretty good as Deadshot in that. The movie's just bad. But then it made me think back to when I saw the Harley Quinn film with my wife, and she adored that movie, and she's not a comic book movie fan. She doesn't read comics, but she had a lot of fun with it. And she kept commenting. She said, I don't know much about this one, but it feels like there were a lot of women involved in making this movie. And when I looked it up, I was like, yeah, there are. And when you compare Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad to Harley Quinn in her own movie, same character. Everything about how she's presented on screen is completely different, because in Harley, Margot is calling a lot of the shots. The director is calling a lot of the shots, obviously. And there's a lot of women involved in that project. The costume, the way they move, the way they're shot, everything about it feels more authentic, doesn't feel super creepy and navel gazy. There aren't as many like butt shots in Harley Quinn as there are in Suicide Squad, which is kind of the only way she's shot in that movie. And it's just better all the way around. It makes for a more enjoyable experience.
The character is more genuine. She's relatable as a woman. She's not just hot and crazy.
Right.
I think with Birds of Prey was the first time that I have ever seen that character depicted in such a way that I felt like all of her behavior patterns and everything, that the way she interacts with everyone, leads right back into the fact that she is a trained psychiatrist and that she is treating everything that she does as a giant sociological experiment, which I've never gotten out of that character before.
Wow.
But also agency. I feel like she has a level of agency that's just, I mean, unheard of to me anyway, which is not that I'm that well educated in the Gotham universe, but it felt to me like this is got to be the first time that Harley Quinn ever has like any real agency of her own.
This is true.
And she even talks about it. I'm remembering now, she has that whole discussion, like that drunk conversation with a stranger about like, do you know what a Harlequin is?
That conversation is with Black Canary.
Right. That's their first interaction, right? Yeah. It's she just like puts it right out there. Like I have lived a life that means I am nothing without this man. And then from there forward, she begins to manipulate her world to meet her agenda. In a good way.
Right. Yeah.
I have a really odd divergent question for you.
No, do it.
Topic. So because you all talk about pop culture and everything, do you pretty much in terms of watching and reading and whatnot, like you just said, yeah, I just watched this movie, even though it's still bad. Like, do you feel it's your responsibility to watch everything that comes out?
Sometimes.
Because I refuse to. My husband and I have a 10-minute rule. So we were watching, and if it's not on, we're like moving on because there's so much good content to watch. And I'd rather rewatch something I enjoy. And that's just me. But I was wondering if you felt you had a responsibility, because my friend who owns a pop culture store, a comic store, he's like, I will never get those hours back of watching Netflix's Iron Fist or whatever it was. I think it was Iron Fist. So I was wondering if you are all in the same boat where you're like, okay, you're going to watch this one and I'll take I'll take one for the team with this, or how does that work?
We have definitely done that before.
Oh yeah.
I think we used to be a little bit, which we used to try harder to all watch a thing, to be able to like have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
But over time, we've realized like, well, we have very divergent schedules, and like some of us have more time than others, and that can flip flop from month to month,
Week to week.
week to week. I mean, every now and then I know I will watch something that I'm not necessarily interested in because I want to be able to have the conversation. But if I don't care enough to even have the conversation, I'm not going to subject myself to something I don't want to see.
Right.
And I think these days we're a little bit more divide and conquer sometimes.
Sometimes.
Very much
like,
so,
I'm still never watching The Room.
Oh.
That's fine because that's fine because we're never going to need to have that conversation.
No.
All of those conversations have happened somewhere else, and it's all those bases are covered. We're good.
Yeah. I mean, one of my previous jobs was an actual film reviewer. So I did have to see everything.
Yeah.
I'd have friends or coworkers say, "It's so cool, you get to watch every movie." And I was always like, "Yes, every movie."
You've trained for this.
I was like, you have no idea. I don't think I've walked out of 2 movies my entire life as a reviewer. One was Rush Hour 3. Because when they were fine with making a butt joke with Roman Polanski in the room, I'm like, okay, I'm out. You guys knew exactly what you were saying here. I'm out. I'm done. I'm not finishing this. And the other was Frank Miller directing The Spirit.
Oh.
That was don't.
I watched that whole movie.
I never saw it.
Don't. That
Don't.
is 2 hours you can't get back.
Do not watch The Spirit.
But in terms of like,
I'll take your word for it.
Mm-hmm.
I am someone that will try to find value in something, if only to comment on it. And also, being a pop culture show, we'll get a lot of like, well, what were your thoughts about this? And if eventually your answer is like, I don't know, I didn't see it. It gets harder and harder to actually comment on so many different aspects of culture, which might be a corner that we've painted ourselves into this room anyway, since we're not just comics, we're not just movies, we're everything. I will watch a lot of things that just aren't that good. But I'll try to find value in it somewhere. There's films that like here's the thing. As a rule, I don't like Zack Snyder movies. I don't think they're well done. I think they're very jingoistic. They're ugly on so many levels. On the flip side, I think if he wasn't directing and he was a cinematographer, I think he'd be a much more effective filmmaker, because I think he has a good eye for types of shots. Mm-hmm. I just don't think he knows how to create the emotional resonance behind those shots.
Yeah.
So I'd rather someone who's a better director saying this is what we're going for, and then have Zach set the camera up and pull it off.
Yeah. I mean, I have a soft spot for like indie filmmakers, because for me, it's like, if you've got millions of dollars and I just feel like this is a wasted film, I'm just not supporting. But for indie filmmakers, I am like, you did it. You made something. I'm proud of you. And
right.
I know what goes into that. And so even if it's not great, so many people talk about making things, or I could have done this better. And I'm like, well, then do it. Do it better.
Do it. Yeah.
So for indie, like I have like a different category for that. But you're right. Like the Zack Snyder, like the big budget films. I'm glad that we have you to watch all the films for us.
But I am also like you. I am much more forgiving when it comes to indie films. I've worked on major films before. I've worked on indie films. I've shot a couple of my own small ones. I know how much work goes into them. That's why even on, not so much big budget ones, I don't really care when they flop, like whatever, everyone's going to be fine. But if an indie or a smaller budget film like tanks, there's a part of me that feels really bad, because I know how much work goes into them. Like, it's just how much blood, sweat, and tears you put into a film. It's like, I don't remember the producer's name. There's this producer who's been quoted before saying that he sits through the credits of every film, even the bad ones, because he knows how hard everyone there worked. And he at least owes them that, you know? But when it comes to stuff like Netflix shows, wow, cash out. I got 2 episodes into Immortal Iron Fist, and I was like, oh, I'm out. Nope, can't do it. You know, and I felt bad because as I read more about how much that production was rushed and that actor was given like an afternoon of martial arts training, I'm like, okay, now have fight scenes, you know?
Yeah. I definitely could not watch that one from even just a martial art perspective. I'm like,
it was so rough.
I would be cringing.
I got 2 episodes in and I was like, I think I can throw a better punch than that. You know,
you get a lot of extra Misty Night though.
That's true.
Because I did watch. Well, there is only 1 season, huh?
Oh yeah. It just felt like
2.
more.
There's 2 seasons of
okay.
Iron Fist.
Is there?
I definitely did not watch the 2nd season.
Nobody did. That's why they cancel it.
Oh,
and all the other connected series.
And like with the Defenders, I think I watched the first episode and the last. I was like, all right.
you get the gist.
Yeah.
The bookends.
I don't need the buildup. I just want to see the Defenders beat people up right now. That's kind of what I want to see. So
it's kind of like a music video. You could just have it on in the background. It's the action and you don't really need the story. You get it.
Yeah. We've done that as a bit for this show a couple times in the past. It was years and years and years ago when they remade Clash of the Titans. One of our old co-hosts, we made it as this joke that the Clash of the Titans video or trailer looked like the best like wanky 80s metal video ever made. So he just built a playlist and put it in his iPod and didn't listen to the movie itself. He just had like 20 metal songs play in his ears while he watched Clash of the Titans. And when we all came out and did that reviewer thing that all critics do, all we did was blast it. He came out, he was like, that was the greatest 90 minutes I've ever had in my life. Like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, it was just nothing. It was the best metal video I ever saw. And then he told us what he did. We're like, damn it, that's a good idea.
Yeah, it could be an improvement.
Yeah.
Martial art movies are a lot like that. That's why I thought of it.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally. I will often just play Tron Legacy in the background, but then just play the soundtrack. I don't need the movie. I just need the pretty visuals and the music. I'm happy with that.
Fair enough.
Do you see, Mimi, like any trends kind of coming in the realm of like, you know, of storytelling that you begin to notice that you think is a positive evolution or a positive change that's coming?
Oh, I don't know. That's like predicting the future, right? Well, the thing was, I think a little bit earlier, we mentioned that there was the slow build from Black Panther to Crazy Rich Asians and all these bigger movies that were coming out that were so well received and very, very diverse. And so that was a bit exciting, for the moment. And like I was saying earlier, there's some Netflix shows out there that Mindy Kaling is doing that has people of color. Like we're looking like at a Pakistani person lead and just things you would never have seen even maybe 2 years ago. And so that's pretty exciting. And I just don't know. And that's why I asked the Netflix question about statistics and how do they, what do they decide to keep promoting? Like it's because of viewership, I would guess. How does that work? Like if people, they know they're watching it, right? So my hope would be that more and more people tend to look at a screen and feel comfortable with it. Because I actually believe there's a lot of people who look at the screen and if they see too many diverse backgrounds, they see too many people of color, they're actually kind of turned off by it. Like, why? It's just jarring. I think it's a little bit jarring still for people. Yeah. So my hope is that the more of these, like even these small little sitcom type shows that are out there, the better. But with, like you said, everything literally being at a halt, I don't even know what production would look like on a set right now in a COVID world without a vaccine, right? Like Greg and I were talking, we're like, what would a love scene be like? The trust that you have to have this intimacy and just, I mean, for us at Kung Fu, we do fight sets all the time. And I'm like, okay, right now, nobody can touch each other. We can't spar. We got to kind of take it easy because there's just so many unknowns. So it's frustrating because there was a little bit of what I think was a small momentum. And I don't know what this climate is bringing to that.
Yeah.
That
I
totally
know.
didn't answer your question, but
No, but it is. I mean, but it's become the root of the problem, or one of them. In that, yeah, there's many, but yeah, when production does come back, you're right. What is it going to look like?
That momentum
know.
is lost now, potentially.
potentially, yeah.
Yeah, are we just for a while just going to go back to kind of one room dramas where people look at each other and just kind of go, yes, hello. You know, we're just going to turn into like late 60s BBC for a while, which, you know, could be fun. But I do know
One
that there's
stationary camera.
yeah.
Well,
I do know that like,
we've. Go ahead.
well, I was just say animation is definitely becoming like,
That's
Yeah.
what I was going to say is
Yeah.
I know that there's a lot of theorizing that animation could be sort of the linchpin for entertainment right now, because it's something that is more feasibly created without putting too many people in the same space or too close together. In which case, I think it just becomes a matter of still opting for the products, quote unquote, that incorporate diverse casts, diverse writers' rooms, and that don't have problematic content.
right. I mean, you can write stuff that makes you uncomfortable, but it's also in how you present it.
Right.
And then there's the question of also theaters, right? So,
Oof.
and I've talked about this before on previous podcasts with people who know a lot more about cinema, but there's that theory that, you know, back when, you know, Ben-Hur and all these things were out, there's these big studio films with thousands of people in them and extras and whatnot, because they were played in a theater for like 1,000 people. And so the number of people on screen was almost representative of the number of people in the audience enjoying that film together. Whereas, you know, fast forward, we've got iPads, we've got iDevices. And so some of the films can be catered to, like you were saying, like that one person on camera, like what was that show in space? Gravity? No.
Gravity.
Yeah. Right? Where,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, okay, you know, obviously it's great on a screen or whatever, but like, you know, there's that movie theory, but theaters aren't even really open yet. And when they are, who's going to be going to them? I mean, we've seen how many films now put on hold, right? Because they just couldn't get their release. And so there's so many like things that are affected that you wonder, well, I don't know. And I had asked a few people, creators, about the animation part. So is it going to look like literally like cartoon animation, or is it more like the Alita where there's actors and then it's, you know, motion capture? And so, but that doesn't appeal to everyone. So I think, I don't know. I think it's a lot of up in the air type of stuff. But the theater thing I was curious about, because box offices just don't know what to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty spoiled in Portland with how many also small indie theaters we have.
Oh, okay.
And what's interesting is they seem to be weathering this pretty well because their fan base, their audience is so supportive. So a lot of theaters here now are opening up, and all they're selling is popcorn. Like I know our local one, the Hollywood Theater, which is a theater that I just adore. I think it was 2 weeks ago. They said, look, we're not open, but they created basically a streaming service with their own website. Like, we're taking the films we were going to screen. You pay a certain amount of money and you can watch it live with everyone else. Like, you can't just log in whenever. It's like, okay, at 8 p.m., we are showing this classic Hammer horror film. If you have a ticket, you get a code to log in and you can watch it knowing that you're there with other people virtually watching this film. But then
it's stuff that's harder to get on streaming services too.
Yeah, also that. And they started selling popcorn out their front door. They're like, you're watching classic movies at home. You know what you're missing? Movie theater popcorn. And people lined up because they want that experience, and they're going to kind of get it any way they can. But I don't know when someone's going to feel safe enough to do it in a theater.
Right. And do we want to be sitting with the people that are fine sitting in a theater right away?
Yeah.
Usually they're the ones that are not careful, right?
Those are all the people who were picketing to open the salons a month ago.
Yes,
so.
yes, that it's okay. I mean, you guys are in Portland. Remember, I am in Florida. It's very different here.
I'm so sorry.
I'm the minority and the minority. Let me tell you, it's Florida. So yeah, you know, yeah. We always have to apologize on behalf of Florida. It's like a constant thing. Just, I'm sorry. I'm from Florida and I'm sorry. But,
Oregon has its own very ugly past. They've just become very good at whitewashing it. Pun 100% intended.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say there's Portland and then there's the rest of Oregon, but that's not quite right either.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway, back to diversity.
Well, no, but you were one thing that I found interesting is how many businesses had to have to be very creative during COVID, and also moving into very controversial like Black Lives Matter stuff. Is like you see all these companies that have to make a decision now. Like one is, how am I going to survive in quarantine? Let me do streaming services. How we moved to virtual classes. Like we immediately had to pivot and shift. And then you have something crazy like these protests and this horrible, murder that happened, and this response to it being completely different than anything else in the past. And now companies also have to respond, right? And how are they going to respond? And so they're all having to pivot. Like the culture is just, everything is so fast. And you have a podcast, so you have a conversation a week ago. You're like, oh God, I mean, everything we talked about feels like 5 years ago. Should we even play it? Because is it relevant? And people are going to go, we're past that. But
right.
There's just so much pivoting and so much that you have to constantly try to recreate as a small business owner. That's kind of what I feel. And you mentioned the indie film thing, the indie theaters, and we only have like one or two maybe in Orlando, but what one did, and I don't even know how they did it because I didn't, but they somehow made the screen where they could do a drive-in, and they showed The Princess Bride, which is like my favorite movie of all time, but it was sold out in like an hour. And so there is a way for these companies' business to find a creative way to kind of get around all of this. But like you said, how long is that novelty going to wear off? And how long are people going to sign into the streaming? And for the other part, the activism part, the companies are being bashed that don't, put out support right away or say something a little bit like, it's just such a precarious time for everyone. It's I don't know what film studios are thinking right now. Like, do we need to just put all Black content? What do we like? I can imagine they're just kind of going crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can imagine a lot of them making just the worst choices right now because they likely don't have an actual Black voice in the room.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a bunch of.
Yeah. I can see someone in a studio executive and just a room full of like white dudes in suits saying, you know what, let's put out a third Shaft movie then. Like, no, that's not. Stop it. I mean, you can, but don't make it like anything like the last two because they were awful.
I'll take your word for it.
How about you actually hire the person that's been writing Shaft lately instead of some, anyway. Right. We're biased because we actually know the person who's been writing Shaft lately.
Yep.
But I will say, like, I actually don't mind the company that maybe takes a day or two before they make a statement, because I hope during that time they're actually looking within their corporate culture and recognizing their issues of like, okay, we're not just going to go and spew this thing out. If we're going to do it, we have to be serious about it. So I can appreciate the companies that are doing that. I don't know how many are. But I think now with so many of these companies now making these statements towards diversity and Black Lives Matter and denouncing police violence, which is all wonderful. Now it's on us to hold them to it, hold them accountable. Like they shouldn't have, in my opinion, shouldn't have gotten a pass in the past, but now they can't.
Right. And there's also a difference. I mean, we're talking two different things. So one, there's like huge, big corporate blah, blah. And then there's, small businesses and everything. And like you said, I feel like there's just a processing time with that. And also being very deliberate about what you're going to say and not just jump on it and throw a meme up that's, I support because I want to seem XYZ. And there's a huge, like my husband and I are looking because, we're small business owners. We want to make sure that, we steal other people's great ideas because, that's why not? Like, oh, this is great. This is good. But there's a difference between people who just say they support, and there's a difference where you see people saying, well, here's what we are doing. Here's the actions that we're taking. Right. And I think that's the key for people to kind of look at and say, well, yes, it's one thing to say you're not racist. I don't know if any company is going to go, yeah, well, we're racist. No one's going to post that, right? Everyone's going to say, oh, we're not. Or anti-racism.
I mean, maybe Chick-fil-A. Oh, sorry. Was that? Oops. This is why we don't get sponsors on the show.
I don't know sponsors either. So.
We have local ones, and they're all very nice small businesses who have had to pivot.
Yes, I mean it's very jarring. So, my husband and I, we both own our own, he does health and fitness and strength training, and I do the Kung Fu side. And, immediately personally, we are, of course, I've always been in support. I've had lots of guests in the past on for Black Lives Matter and everything. But from the company standpoint, you have to be very careful because you also don't want to come across like you're alienating your students or clients or whatnot. You have to kind of draw a line between politics. And for me, what made me make sure that so what we posted was literally like in Kung Fu, you do a bow for respect, and we do a lot of different stances. That is one of our stances is called kneeling, and we're actually kneeling. So we did a bow in a kneeling stance to, show support. And then I did hashtag Black Lives Matter specifically because I wanted to be very clear that we're not just anti-racist, but we also really believe in this movement. And the difference that made me pick that was that I felt like it wasn't a political issue, that it was more of a moral and ethical issue. But I think every company also make that choice for themselves and how they see it, and who's in, like you said, who's in their staff and in the corporation and all these things. There's just so much to it. And I think it's easy to just criticize, but when you're on the deciding side, I have a little bit of empathy for that. And so as long as you eventually come to the right message,
right,
I think you have to give people time.
Yeah, I think, and if you come to it with some authenticity, I think people will appreciate and notice that for sure.
And allow people to change their minds. Like if they get new information and realize they were wrong, I think at this point we should take what we can get, like apologies.
Yeah. That's why I have a big issue with the 100% putting someone on blast and cancel culture. Because if you don't allow someone the chance to acknowledge their errors and grow, then what's the point? There are some things that I would probably not forgive. And you know what? Maybe there's some things you're not welcome back to the table. But I think there's a lot of stuff as someone grows, you have to let them grow. I think everyone of personal nature, you don't necessarily have to like be cool with them, but you don't actually have to go after them anymore either, if that makes sense. Right. Like, you know what? I can appreciate that you've grown and you've done better, but I'm still not good with hanging out with you. And this is a more broad statement, but good for you. I'm not going to I'm also not going to hinder you, but I'm not going to be your friend either.
Yeah. I mean, it's also, if we all just took a small look at ourselves, like all of us at some point in our teens or youth, where we were all an asshole at some point. So I'm sure that we could say, oh, there's something I've done that's been wrong. And it's easy to just jump on it. And I don't think that's helpful. So
I look at writing I did 10 years ago and go like, ooh, I mean, it's still on the blog, but whoa.
But that's important because that shows your growth, and I think it's good. And I think you feel that way because it's your writing, because I feel that way about my